So then you can start to look at basic characteristics about it, like what's the length of it? Is it a 8-bit, or sorry, an 8-byte blob, or is it a 10-byte blob? Is it a multiple of a common block size? If it's a 10-byte blob or an 11-byte blob, you can guarantee that it's not going to be the output of a block cipher using an 8-byte block, because it doesn't divide evenly. Other things you can look at are, is the length the same as a known hash algorithm? So if you see 32 hex characters, that might be an MD5 hash. That might be a block of output of a block cipher. So you can't say for sure that it's MD5, but certain kind of magic lengths, like 32 hex characters, are indicative that it might be a hash. It might be a straight hash. It might be a keyed hash. You don't really know. Again, we're just trying to take some of these heuristics and gather information about what we're seeing. Then you start with the tokens themselves. Can you affect, so you're trying to figure out which pieces of data within the web application itself affect that blob that you're looking at. Let's say, in this case, the token is a cookie. So I change my username. That cookie pieces time you might happen is I have to keep increasing my username a couple characters, and then, oh, look, it goes beyond that block boundary and I get another full block. For the cookie to change again, now then it jumps up by another 8 bytes. So you can use these sort of behaviors. I mean, if you see that behavior, that's very cut and dry, that if I've got to add 8, every time I add 8 characters, the token jumps by 8 characters. That's your likelihood is pretty high there that they're using a block cipher. And then finally, figuring out which parts of the input actually affect the output. So maybe not actually affect, but then I go and see, I'm just changing the username. Nothing's happening to the cookie. But if I change the password, suddenly we get that block increase again. So we know now that the username is probably not stored in the token, and the password probably is. And then we say, well, how does changing the password actually affect the password? What happens? Does it change one block only? Because that would indicate maybe an ECB mode, or one block. And then you can get in a little bit deeper, and you can start to try to narrow down cipher modes. Blocks in the same token, that's indicative of ECB, because that just doesn't happen by chance. There's a number of sort of these heuristic techniques that you can do across a lot of data, and just look for blocks to be repeated or blocks to show up in the same position or different positions across different tokens that can give you some insight into the cipher mode. I'm going to skip through this because I want to get to the case studies. So our first thing, we're going to talk about a block cipher that we attacked. This was a while ago, and I can't remember exactly what the context was, but I think it was like something to do with an ISP, and it was a web portal, and the subscribers could manage their accounts and do various things on it that were related to their accounts. The important part is that this application track user identity. So this is what it looked like when you fetched a page. This was like a My Account page, so something that you would obviously have to be logged into the retrieve. And what is depending on there is this cookie that's being passed in every request called, in this case it's called the EE cookie, but it contains a bunch of base64 encoded junk in it, and that was what it used to determine who you were. And it passed that over with every request. So essentially, instead of using sessions, like most applications would under normal circumstances, they were passing over encrypted form of the actual credential itself. So every time you issue a request, you click on My Account, you click on some other pages, it would issue you a new one of these cookies, which would then, of course, your browser would then issue back on the subsequent request. So as you're browsing through the application, you can capture a bunch of these different cookies because the server was sending you a new one every time you did something. So capturing statistically relevant was not difficult in this case. If you're just passing proxy and then just grepping out, all the cookie values. So you base 64 decode them. I mentioned before that was easily base 64. So you base 64 decode them and you get that. Well, then we ask some of these questions, like what is the length? Is the length a multiple of what I was getting to? So we divide it by, so each one of these is an 8 block. By coincidence, if you were in one of the more secure Cipher modes, like there's close to zero chance that would just happen. But what's happening here is that they've got, this is ECB, they've got the same, that block is consisting of the same plain text data in both cases, and it's just coming out the other end, and the ciphertext is the same. Same thing is happening with the one at the bottom there in blue, and it's happening in the same sort of positions, which we don't really know what that means yet. We just know that we see repetition. So then we kind of want to figure out what's actually going on here. What is in this thing that we're looking at? And we see that in looking at all these cookies that the application is issuing us throughout the length of our login session, the only blocks that really change are the last two. Every time it issues me a new one, most of the token is the same. It just changes the last bits of it. So there's a possibility that there's some sort of timeout mechanism there that's an encrypted timestamp so that it won't accept that cookie after it's been stale for like 10 or 15 minutes. That's a guess. I actually have no idea what it's for. But then we get to the point where we try to apply the technique of figuring out how we can affect the token. So we start changing things in our profile. Is my phone number represented in there? Nope. Is it my address? No. My username. You start changing your username, and the size of the token starts changing. So now you know that the username is probably actually stored in there because you can directly affect it based on the length. So we register a new account in the application with a really long username, 32 bytes, which is the maximum length that it would let you select for a username. And now I've got this EE cookie back that's 11 blocks long instead of the 7 block ones that we were looking at before. So clearly I have a direct influence on the length of that cookie, which is what I just said. The token is longer, meaning the username is probably stored in the cookie. And then what's more interesting there is that we see this repetition that I mentioned before. You see the repetition of the ciphertext mirroring that repeated input, the 32C characters. So what you're looking at there is probably, I'm getting ahead of myself. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do this again. We're going to do it with a 16-byte, 16C username instead of a 32 one, and we're going to compare that. And again, we're just looking for patterns. So that's what happens when I register those two different usernames. And again, you can see that repeated block. So the theory there is that the block that's highlighted must be the encrypted form of 8Cs, because we see it appearing in both of these different